Every widow shatters when handed her husband's remains from a crash site, but my tears froze the second his recovered smartwatch synced to my phone. It registered a strong, steady heartbeat on a beach thousands of miles from Seattle. His charred final letter begged me to terminate my 5-month pregnancy and start over. It was a perfectly staged tragedy, until I decided to make his fake death a legal reality, stripping every penny he had left. Hello, dear listeners of Zoe Revenge Stories. We are incredibly grateful for your continued support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story and want to help our team put food on the table so they can keep creating these dramas for you, please consider donating just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description and pinned comment. My name is Neve Pierce. The world as I knew it ended on a bleak Tuesday afternoon when the house phone rang. The voice on the other end of the line was painfully clinical, trained to deliver nightmares. A representative from the airline informed me that my husband, Julian Vance, had been on the domestic flight that vanished off the radar 2 hours prior. They had just located the wreckage. The aircraft had plummeted into a jagged mountain ridge during a blinding Colorado blizzard. There were 0 survivors. I was exactly 5 months pregnant. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. The silence in our sprawling Seattle home suddenly felt like a freezing tomb, echoing with a deafening emptiness. The next 48 hours were a hazy blur of sedative-laced tea, hushed phone calls from devastated relatives, and suffocating, relentless grief. Then came the knock on the door. It was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the vice president of finance at Vanguard Horizon Logistics, the corporate giant where Julian served as a senior director. Marcus stood on my front porch, his expensive dark wool coat speckled with heavy rain, wearing an expression of practiced, rigid sympathy. He did not come empty-handed. We sat in the dim light of the living room. Marcus slowly slid a clear plastic evidence bag across the glass coffee table. Inside the bag was a piece of heavily scorched paper, its edges curled, brittle, and blackened by fire. He told me it was recovered directly from the crash site, one of the very few personal items that somehow survived the inferno. My hands shook so violently I could barely manage to break the seal. I recognized Julian's jagged, hurried handwriting immediately. The words written on that burned paper made the very air in my lungs evaporate into nothing. I do not want to be a burden to you. Let the baby go. Take the insurance money and start a new life. I could not breathe. I clutched the charred paper to my chest and fled upstairs, ignoring Marcus as he called out my name from the bottom of the staircase. I locked the master bedroom door and collapsed onto the cold floor of Julian's walk-in closet. I pulled his heavy winter coat down from the hanger, burying my wet face deep into the fabric, desperately inhaling the fading, familiar scent of his cedarwood cologne. I sobbed until my throat bled, unleashing the agonizing wails of a woman whose entire future had just been incinerated in a distant snowstorm. Deep inside my womb, my unborn child began to kick and thrash wildly, deeply agitated by the massive spikes of cortisol and sheer terror flooding my system. I wrapped my arms around my swelling belly, rocking back and forth in the dark, whispering broken apologies to a baby who would now never know a father. But my period of mourning was abruptly hijacked. Marcus did not leave me alone to grieve in peace. Over the next few days, he became a persistent, suffocating shadow in my home. He would show up unannounced, bringing expensive groceries I could not stomach, always skillfully steering our conversations back to that scorched piece of paper. He sat across from me at the kitchen island, his voice low, steady, and relentlessly pressing. "Nevea, we have to honor his final wishes," Marcus murmured, leaning forward. Julian was a highly practical man. He knew this tragedy would utterly destroy you, raising a child all alone, facing the massive financial burden, the crushing emotional toll. He wanted to spare you from all of that pain. Marcus reached into his tailored suit jacket and slid a sleek, ivory business card across the marble counter. It belonged to a highly discreet, elite private doctor in the city. "I took the liberty of making an appointment for you this coming Friday morning," Marcus said softly, though his dark eyes were completely devoid of actual warmth. "It is exactly what Julian wanted. He wanted you to be free. You need to let the pregnancy go." The psychological pressure he applied was like an invisible vice slowly tightening around my neck. Every single time I broke down crying. Marcus was right there, weaponizing my husband's supposed dying words to push me violently toward the clinic. I was drowning in an ocean of grief, completely unaware that the man constantly pushing my head under the water was merely following a sick, twisted script written by the very ghost I was mourning. 3 days passed in an agonizing blur of unread condolence cards and untouched food before a delivery van pulled into my circular driveway. A weary courier handed over a heavy, familiar piece of dark gray luggage. It was Julian's checked suitcase. A representative from the airline had called earlier to explain that this specific bag had been delayed in their automated sorting system due to a barcode error and never actually made it into the cargo hold of the doomed aircraft. Dragging it into the hallway felt exactly like dragging a coffin. I sat on the floor and slowly unzipped it. I sifted through neatly folded luxury dress shirts, expensive silk ties, and custom Italian shoes, tucked away inside a hidden side mesh pocket. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out his backup smartwatch, a sleek titanium device with a completely dead battery. He must have tossed it in there at the last minute as an afterthought. I carried the lifeless piece of technology into the kitchen and connected it to the magnetic charging dock resting on the granite counter. I had no logical reason to charge it other than a desperate yearning to feel close to him. I hoped it might power on and display a favorite photo of us on the background screen. 10 minutes later, the display flickered to life, glowing brightly in the dim room. Because we shared the same encrypted home network, the device immediately caught the local wireless signal and automatically synced to our shared family cloud account. I was standing by the sink, pouring a glass of cold water with red, swollen eyes, when a sharp, cheerful chime pierced the oppressive quiet of the house. I slowly walked over and looked down at the tiny glowing screen. A bright green notification bubble popped up, displaying a standard automated fitness alert. My heart stopped beating inside my chest. The digital text on the screen read clearly, "Julian Vance just completed a 5-mile run in Miami, Florida." It was stamped with today's date, recording the activity exactly 45 minutes ago. The glass slipped from my numb fingers, shattering violently across the kitchen tile. The cold water pooled around my bare feet, but I could not feel a thing. I stared at the tiny screen, a violent tremor taking over my entire body. Miami, Florida, a dead man whose ashes were supposedly scattered across a frozen, blood-stained Colorado mountain ridge does not wake up and run 5 miles on a sunny beach. My mind raced wildly, desperately clawing for a logical explanation, a network glitch, a stolen identity, a cruel hacker, but the pure, raw adrenaline surging through my veins told a much darker story. I rushed upstairs to the home office and frantically dug through the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk, searching for an old tablet we kept for controlling the smart home system. Several months ago, Julian had carelessly logged into a secondary, heavily encrypted cloud account on this exact device to check a private email and forgot to wipe his login credentials. I opened the device tracking application with trembling hands. The digital compass spun on the screen for a few agonizing seconds before decisively dropping a bright blue location pin on the map. The signal was broadcasting live and strong from an ultra-luxury, 5-star oceanfront resort in South Beach. He was there. My dead husband was alive, breathing, and apparently enjoying a beautiful morning workout while I sat home planning his funeral. Suddenly, every bizarre, suffocating interaction over the past week snapped together like pieces of a grotesque, twisted puzzle. The perfectly preserved, highly dramatic farewell letter conveniently found in the fiery wreckage, Marcus showing up relentlessly at my door, pushing the private clinic, aggressively demanding I terminate my pregnancy to honor a final dying wish. The truth hit me with the sheer, brutal force of a freight train. knocking the breath completely out of my lungs. Julian never boarded that plane. That burned letter was not a final, desperate act of profound love from a dying man wanting to spare his wife from hardship. It was a cold-blooded, meticulously calculated command. By faking his death in a catastrophic accident, he could vanish entirely with a clean slate, but a legal heir, my unborn child, would instantly trigger massive probate court delays, tying up his estates, freezing his bank accounts, and stalling the massive life insurance payouts. He needed me to destroy the only legal anchor that could stop him from liquidating his empire and disappearing with all the wealth. The burning tears of grief that had constantly stained my cheeks for days instantly evaporated, replaced by a freezing, terrifying, and absolute clarity. I was not a grieving widow. I was an obstacle in a massive financial conspiracy. I walked over to my full-length mirror, unzipped the heavy black morning dress I'd been wearing, and let it drop pooling to the floor. I stepped into a soft, comfortable pair of gray sweatpants and an oversized, loose cotton sweater. The weeping, broken woman was dead. As I wiped the very last trace of moisture from my eyes, I placed a firm, protective hand over my swelling belly, sat down at his computer, and began to meticulously map out my counterattack. The morning widow routine was going to be my greatest weapon. Armed with the administrative password I had extracted from his carelessly linked cloud account, I immediately contacted a highly discreet private forensic data specialist. I gave him a very simple, heart-wrenching cover story. I was the devastated, pregnant wife of the late corporate director, and I desperately wanted to recover any personal photographs, private emails, and cherished digital memories my husband might have stored on his workstation at Vanguard Horizon Logistics. A few well-placed tears over a secure phone call were all it took to get the specialist inside the building under the guise of an IT condolence retrieval. In less than 48 hours, the expert handed me a fully decrypted clone of Julian's hidden corporate hard drive. I sat in the glow of the dual monitors in his home office, sipping black coffee, methodically sifting through gigabytes of encrypted corporate greed and deep personal betrayal. It did not take long to find the ghost he had been hiding. Her name was Sloane Sterling, on paper. She was a glamorous, high-end art broker operating out of a sleek gallery downtown, but hidden deep within a nested folder labeled with a string of random numbers. Her true profession was glaringly obvious. She was a sophisticated money launderer for the corporate elite, using inflated modern art appraisals to wash dirty money clean. She was also, as the hundreds of explicit photos and sickeningly affectionate text messages proved, Julian's secret mistress of the past 2 years. The sheer scale of their financial conspiracy made my blood run cold, yet my mind remained razor-sharp. Julian had not just planned to abandon his family, he was systematically looting our entire life together, using Sloane's vast network of illicit contacts. He had quietly established a series of impenetrable offshore trust funds in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, entirely under her name. He was in the final stages of liquidating and transferring exactly 80% of our combined marital assets, including joint investment portfolios, real estate equity, and his massive hidden corporate bonuses. The banking documents clearly stated that the international wire transfers and complete disbursement of these funds would be finalized and untouchable in exactly 14 days. The countdown had already begun. If I waited, I would be left with nothing but an empty house and a mountain of phantom debt. But the final nail in his coffin came from an unexpected source. While digging through the bottom layers of the clone drive, I uncovered a synchronized audio backup folder from the cloud-connected dash camera installed in his secondary vehicle, a vintage sports car he rarely drove. I clicked on an audio file dated just 2 weeks prior to the plane crash. The sound of smooth jazz played softly in the background, followed by the unmistakable, arrogant drawl of my husband. Then, a sharp, cold female voice echoed through the speakers. It was Sloane. "Are you absolutely sure Marcus can handle the pressure?" Sloane asked, her voice dripping with irritation. "If she delays the procedure, the probate lawyers will freeze everything. Marcus is handling it, Julian replied smoothly, the sound of ice clinking in a glass cutting through the audio. He will use the grief against her. As long as your wife gets the abortion, the estate assets will not be locked up in family court. We will drain every single account dry before she even figures it out. Good, Sloane sneered. I am not waiting another year for that pathetic pregnant cow to sign over the equity. I sat perfectly still, letting the heavy silence of the empty house wash over me. I felt the baby shift gently in my womb, a soft flutter of life against the cold, hard reality of my existence. They thought I was a pathetic, pregnant cow. They thought my grief would blind me, that I would be an easy, fragile victim easily manipulated by a fake suicide note and a corrupt corporate lackey. They were entirely wrong. I closed the audio file and opened a secure browser window. If Julian wanted to play a ruthless game of financial warfare, I needed an apex predator on my side. I bypassed the standard family attorneys and went straight for the deep waters. I typed in the name Arthur Kensington. He was a legendary, notoriously ruthless legal shark in the Seattle elite circles, a man who specialized exclusively in high-stakes asset disputes and hostile corporate divorces. Kensington did not negotiate. He destroyed. I picked up my phone, dialed his direct private line, and prepared to hire the one man capable of helping me lock my dead husband securely in the grave he had dug for himself. The memorial service was a masterpiece of macabre theater. I hosted a small, highly exclusive gathering at our estate under the guise of finding closure. The air in the grand living room was thick with the suffocating scent of white lilies and the hushed, pitying whispers of Julian's corporate colleagues and distant relatives. I made sure my performance was flawless. I wore a conservative, high-necked black dress that perfectly accentuated the slight swell of my pregnancy, making me look even more fragile and utterly defeated. I applied just enough pale foundation to look sleep-deprived and kept a delicate lace handkerchief tightly clutched in my trembling hands, dabbing at eyes that I had intentionally irritated with a harsh saline wash right before the guests arrived. They all looked at me with varying degrees of profound sorrow and hidden relief. To them, I was exactly what society expects a grieving, pregnant widow to be: an empty vessel, a broken woman entirely incapable of managing her own life, let alone a sprawling financial empire. I nodded meekly at their hollow condolences, my mind operating on a completely different frequency. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus Thorne predictably cornered me near the grand piano. He held a glass of expensive bourbon, his eyes scanning the room to ensure we were isolated. He offered me a warm, deeply sympathetic smile that did not quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "You are incredibly brave for doing this today, Navaya," Marcus murmured softly, stepping uncomfortably close. "Julian would be so proud of how strong you are being." "I am just trying to survive the day, Marcus," I whispered back, letting my voice crack perfectly on the last syllable. I lowered my gaze, playing the part of the exhausted victim to absolute perfection. Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit. He smoothly retrieved a crisp, manila envelope and slid it discreetly onto the piano bench beside me. I knew exactly what was inside without needing to open it. "The clinic needs the final consent form signed by Monday morning to keep the appointment discreet." Marcus pressed gently, his tone laced with that familiar, sickeningly sweet manipulation. "I know this is impossibly hard, but remember his letter. He wanted you to be unburdened. He wanted you to have a fresh start. You need to do this for him." I picked up the envelope, ensuring my fingers visibly shook as I touched the thick paper. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and swimming with perfectly manufactured tears. "I just need a little more time," I pleaded, my voice trembling with entirely fake desperation. "Please, Marcus, give me 3 more days. I want to think it through carefully so I do not disappoint Julian." The irony of my words tasted like sweet, dark chocolate on my tongue. I had absolutely no intention of disappointing Julian. I fully intended to destroy him. Marcus, completely oblivious to the double meaning of my request, offered a patronizing pat on my shoulder. He agreed to the delay, confident that he had me backed into a psychological corner, completely unaware that he had just willingly stepped into a fatal trap. While I was busy putting on an Oscar-worthy performance in the living room, my newly hired shark, Arthur Kensington, was systematically dismantling Julian's entire financial existence in the shadows. Kensington did not bother with polite inquiries. Operating with the absolute legal authority of a lawful wife carrying the sole legitimate heir to the Vance estate, he bypassed the local probate judges and went straight to the federal court. He filed a massive, airtight emergency injunction within a matter of hours. Every single domestic bank account, stock portfolio, and real estate asset tied to Julian's name or social security number was slammed shut with a federal freeze order. But Kensington was far too thorough to stop there. Knowing that Marcus was the inside man facilitating the corporate side of the theft, my lawyer drafted a highly confidential, legally devastating whistleblower notice. He dispatched it directly to the independent board of directors at Vanguard Horizon Logistics. The document cited credible, documented suspicions of gross insurance fraud, executive embezzlement, and the active dissipation of corporate marital assets. The board panicked. To protect their own liability, they immediately locked down all corporate financial channels. The discretionary executive accounts managed by Marcus Thorne were frozen instantly. Pending a comprehensive third-party forensic audit, Marcus was effectively paralyzed, completely stripped of his financial power within his own company. Thousands of miles away, the sunny illusion of Miami was violently shattering. At an exclusive, oceanfront high-end boutique, Julian stood at the checkout counter, attempting to purchase a ridiculously expensive designer watch using one of his supposedly untraceable corporate shadow cards. He handed the sleek black plastic to the cashier with a charming, arrogant smile. A few seconds later, the machine beeped a harsh, flat rejection, declined, annoyed. He handed over a second card, declined again. Back at their ultra-luxury resort suite, Sloane Sterling was experiencing a complete meltdown. She sat frantically refreshing her encrypted banking portal on her laptop. The offshore trust funds in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, the very accounts designed to receive the stolen 80% of our marital wealth, were flashing bright red error codes. The incoming wire transfers from Seattle had been brutally rejected and locked by international compliance mandates triggered by Kensington's federal injunction. The millions of dollars they thought they had cleanly stolen were now trapped in a legal purgatory. Julian was a legally dead man with zero access to his own money, trapped in a highly expensive vacation spot with an increasingly furious mistress. The invisible noose I had woven from their own greed was finally pulling tight, and they had absolutely no idea that the fragile, weeping widow in Seattle was the one holding the rope. Down in Miami, the tropical paradise had rapidly devolved into a suffocating, gilded cage. Julian was a legally deceased phantom. He could not simply stroll into a local bank branch with his driver's license and demand access to frozen accounts without immediately triggering a massive federal manhunt. The entire illusion of his perfect escape was crumbling violently around him. In a state of pure, unadulterated panic, he resorted to purchasing a cheap, untraceable prepaid burner phone from a corner convenience store. He dialed Marcus's private number, pacing frantically across the marble floor of his luxury suite. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly how that conversation went. Julian was cornered, screaming through the static, demanding that Marcus fix the massive legal disaster I had just created. He ordered his corporate lackey to force me into dropping the lawyer's federal injunction immediately, no matter what psychological torture he had to inflict upon me to get it done. Less than 2 hours after that frantic call, the heavy brass knocker on my front door slammed violently. Marcus had completely abandoned all pretense of the gentle, grieving colleague. When I opened the door, his face was flushed with poorly concealed rage. He pushed past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. The patronizing sympathy he had worn so easily at the memorial service was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, aggressive venom. "Do you have any idea what you are doing to us?" Marcus snarled, his voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings of the entryway. "Your lawyers are tearing Vanguard Horizon Logistics apart. You are dragging the company's pristine reputation through the mud with these insane audit requests. Worse, you are permanently stalling the life insurance payout. You are ruining everything Julian built, and I will not let you destroy this firm." I did not flinch. I did not cry. I calmly walked into the kitchen and began preparing a pot of loose-leaf chamomile tea. "Sit down, Marcus," I said smoothly, pouring the steaming hot water into the ceramic pot. He stood frozen, glaring at my back, breathing heavily. I carried 2 delicate porcelain teacups to the dining table and took my seat. I pulled a small digital tablet from the pocket of my cardigan and placed it flat on the mahogany table between us. "You are making a massive, irreversible mistake, Neve," he threatened, taking a threatening step closer, leaning over the table to intimidate me. Instead of arguing, I simply tapped the play button on the screen. The crisp, clear audio from Julian's hidden dash camera filled the silent dining room. The recording played the exact moment Marcus had gleefully negotiated his personal cut of the stolen marital wealth. "I will handle the widow," his own recorded voice echoed back at him, dripping with arrogance. "But keeping the executive board off your back while you siphon the funds requires immense risk. I want 20% of the total black fund. Julian, not a penny less." Marcus turned the color of wet ash. His aggressive posture collapsed entirely. His knees buckled, and he dropped heavily into the chair opposite me, staring at the glowing tablet as if it were a live grenade. A thick bead of cold sweat rolled down his temple. The silence that followed was absolute perfection. I let him drown in it for a full minute. "You have 2 very distinct choices today. Marcus," I stated, my voice as cold and sharp as cracked glass. "Choice number 1, I hand this audio file, along with a mountain of forensic digital evidence, straight to my friends at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You will face multiple counts of federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit grand embezzlement, and being an active accessory to a faked death. You will spend the next 2 decades rotting in a federal penitentiary." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, savoring the warmth. "Choice number 2. You become exactly what I tell you to be, my obedient puppet." Sweating profusely and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, Marcus chose self-preservation without a second of hesitation. I handed him his own mobile phone and dictated his exact lines, threatening to hit send on the email to the authorities if he deviated by a single syllable. He dialed the burner number Julian had called from earlier. When Julian answered, Marcus swallowed hard, terrified of the invisible gun I had pointed directly at his head. "Julian, it is me," Marcus stammered, his eyes darting nervously toward me for approval. "I fixed it. The widow finally caved under the pressure. She agreed to the abortion, and she signed the complete asset waiver. The lawyers are backing off." A heavy, relieved sigh crackled through the phone speaker. "But there is a major problem," Marcus continued, reading the script I had meticulously written for him. "The Swiss bank flagged the massive transfer. Because of the recent federal freeze, they escalated their internal security protocols to the highest level. They are demanding direct biometric authentication from Sloan Sterling to unlock the offshore trust. Retinal scans and fingerprints. They absolutely refuse to do it remotely. She has to be physically present at the main Seattle branch by tomorrow afternoon, or the funds will be permanently seized by the state." I could hear Sloan shrieking in the background over the phone line. Panic erupted on the other end. Julian and Sloan were completely trapped by their own elaborate web of lies. They had millions of dollars dangling just out of reach, blocked by a single, terrifying requirement. They could not abandon the money. But returning to the city where Julian had just been declared dead was professional suicide. The blinding greed, however, was a far stronger drug than their rational fear. With no other viable options to secure their stolen wealth, the dead man and his money launderer were forced to utilize highly illegal, forged travel documents. Gritting their teeth in blind desperation, they booked a secret red-eye flight under fake names, flying straight through the dark night, willingly walking directly into the steel cage I had waiting for them. The heavy soundproof tempered glass doors of the executive boardroom on the top floor of Vanguard Horizon Logistics offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. It was the perfect stage for the final act. I watched through the internal security monitors as Marcus nervously swiped his keycard. He stepped into the massive room, leading Sloane Sterling. Close behind her was a tall, heavily built man attempting to blend into the background. He wore an oversized dark trench coat, a low-pulled baseball cap, and thick black sunglasses, playing the role of her hired security detail. They were here to physically authenticate the massive wire transfers and finally unlock the stolen assets. The moment the three of them crossed the threshold, the heavy electronic doors slid shut, sealing automatically with a loud, echoing metallic click. Instantly, the overhead fluorescent lights flared to maximum brightness, flooding the room with an unforgiving white glare. The door to the adjoining executive washroom swung open, and I stepped out. I was no longer the fragile, weeping widow wrapped in a suffocating black dress. I wore a razor-sharp, tailored navy blue power suit, left perfectly unbuttoned at the front to proudly frame my 6-month pregnant belly. Flanking my sides were Arthur Kensington and 2 stern-faced federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. The burly bodyguard froze dead in his tracks. The dark sunglasses slipped from his face, clattering loudly against the polished oak conference table. His jaw dropped, all the color draining from his face as he stared at the woman he thought he had successfully buried. I looked right into the terrified eyes of my deceased husband and smiled, a smile completely devoid of any warmth. "Welcome back from the dead, Julian," I said, my voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. Your heartbeat in Miami was beating remarkably well. Panic erupted. Kensington did not waste a single second. He tossed a massive, heavily bound legal dossier onto the center of the table. It contained every single piece of damning evidence we had meticulously gathered: the forged flight manifests, the detailed offshore money laundering trails, the recorded dash camera confessions, and the undeniable proof of his massive insurance fraud scheme. "Here is the beautifully ironic part of your master plan," Kensington announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Because you were officially and legally pronounced dead by the state, and your death certificate was completely finalized, you currently have absolutely no legal standing to claim a single dime. By law, every single penny, every property, and all corporate equity automatically defaulted to your lawful widow and your unborn heir." Sloane shrieked wildly. Realizing her glamorous life was over, she instantly turned on Julian, screaming at the top of her lungs that he had manipulated her, that he had forced her into the illegal scheme. The federal agents were completely unbothered by her dramatic performance. They swiftly stepped forward and snapped cold steel handcuffs around her wrists, placing her under immediate arrest for international money laundering and wire fraud. Marcus slumped heavily against the glass wall, weeping quietly into his hands as a third agent arrived to escort him away for corporate embezzlement and conspiracy. Julian was utterly shattered. The arrogant, untouchable mastermind collapsed entirely. He fell to his knees on the carpeted floor, crawling desperately toward me, hot tears streaming down his face. "Neve, please," he sobbed, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "I am so sorry. I lost my mind. Please, look at me. Think of our family. Think of the beautiful child growing inside you. You cannot do this to me." I stepped forward, looking down at the pathetic creature groveling at my feet. I leaned in close, my face just inches from his ear, and whispered the words that would haunt him for the rest of his miserable life. "You asked me to let the baby go and start a new life," I murmured softly. "I am doing exactly that. I am keeping my child, and I am letting you go." Several months later, the dark clouds that had once suffocated my life were completely gone. It was a bright, sunny morning in the lush, blooming gardens of my newly purchased coastal estate. I sat in a comfortable wicker chair, gently rocking my beautiful, healthy baby boy in my arms. The warm ocean breeze rustled the green leaves above us. I took a slow, relaxing sip of my hot black coffee and picked up my digital tablet to read the morning news. There, glowing clearly on the screen, was the final headline I had been waiting for. Former corporate executive Julian Vance had been officially sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal prison, entirely without the possibility of parole. I locked the screen, placed the tablet on the table, and kissed my son gently on his warm forehead. I smiled, breathing in the fresh, clean air. Finally ready to enjoy a beautiful, wealthy life with absolutely no stains left behind. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning in to Zoe Revenge Stories. Where are you listening to this story from today? Please let us know in the comments. If you found today's story engaging and want to help our team out, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link in the description and pinned comment. Your support allows us to pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue creating even better stories for you. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.